All right. Hey, good morning. It's Tuesday, and if you live down here in the sunny South, it's not quite so. It's going to be sunny, but it's going to be cold today. It's in the 20s right now, and so I'm out here in my studio, which is a glorified garage with no heat, so it's a little cool. And but man, life is so good. We are yesterday we had a computer. I bought a computer from a friend of mine, relatively new, and he just didn't need it anymore. And I needed one for the church that we're starting, so that I could have just it's clean and I can just keep church stuff on it, PowerPoint, sermons, all that kind of thing. So I was trying to reset the iOS and update everything and turn it, take it back to factory reset. And apparently I made a couple of wrong moves and the screen came up. It's all black. Got this circle with a line through it, like not going to happen. And so, man, I thought I'd ruined the computer. Took it to Apple yesterday. So people they are so good at service there. And left it with them. He called and then texted me late yesterday afternoon or evening and said it's working. So, man, I'm excited about that. So things are kind of falling into place. Got a meeting today about a location where we're going to begin. We're going to do 10 weeks of church at a little coffee shop, hopefully. It's not a little, it's a pretty large one. And looking forward to what's taking place there. So it's like things are kind of falling into place, which is what I've been praying for that God would do as we seek to establish a new way of church. And so looking forward to that. And glad you're here today. I'm glad we're here together looking at Luke. This has been rich and good. We are... Man, I think I told Tam, I think we've got about 100 lessons to go in this, maybe. So it'll be a minute before we get there, 90 something, I think. But before we finish the book, but man, what a great book it is. And so we are on. We're in Luke chapter 14, verse 25 today. So the way Luke breaks down is he gives us snippets of stories, teachings at this point of Jesus, and they're raw. And they're real, and they're pointed, and really, really good and powerful. And so that's where we are today. And so he raises the issue of discipleship. Now, the stage is set when it says now large crowds were going along with him, right? So that's what's happening. And we said that since so when he finished his Galilean ministry, so to speak, and he's beginning to head up to Jerusalem, he sent the 70 out, two by two, and they dotted the little villages that he was going to make his way to. And so he's not in a hurry to get there, so it's not like he's in a straight line. He's just zigzagging, sometimes on one side of the river, sometimes on the other, sometimes a little northeast, a little southwest, and it's just kind of how he's playing the deal. But the crowds have gotten so large that Luke records it like it's just monumental. And so you've got the large crowds, and in that large crowd, you've got those that are curious, you've got those that are kind of committed in some sense, you've got a crowd of people that are just there because it's the thing to do. You've got the contentious, the Pharisees, those who want to kill him, the Sadducees, the scribes, all of those. And so they're all following him. Jesus has been very pointed at the Pharisees. They're there, and he knows it. And so what he's doing is pointing out their hypocrisy, their self-righteousness, their pride, all of those things. And he's saying, don't be like them. And beware of the leaven of the Pharisees, right? Their hypocrisy and how it'll permeate and it'll destroy everything in its track. And so he's clearly got these sides, and so they're trying to call him a demoniac, trying to say his works aren't of the works of God, they're of the works of Satan. That was when Jesus paused. When they said that, it was like bells went off in that sense. He looks at them and says, man, there's a whole lot of things that God will forgive. But what he won't do is you forgiven the sin of blasphemy against the Holy Spirit. And when you attributed the works that I did, Jesus is saying, to Satan, you crossed the line. And so there is that place where then their hearts were hardened, and God went ahead and sealed the hard hearts. And so, in a sense, we hear where Jesus says, it's your house, your temple. It was my Father's house when he first began. Now, because they're so close to the Passover, that he's saying it is now your house, like God has left the building, so to speak. Yet the crowds are still following. They're still trying to trip him and trip him up. Then you remember the Pharisees invited him to dinner on the last Sabbath, or lunch, Sunday Sabbath lunch. Eating bread, and that's when the conversations took place. And so we're done with that. He's left the house, and now he's beginning to make these ways. And there's a large crowd. And so here we pick up the story, and it says, "Now large crowds were going along with him, and he turned and said to them, 'If anyone comes to me and does not hate his own father, mother, wife, children, brothers, sisters, yes, and even his own life, he cannot be my disciple.'" Now, he's spoken about discipleship a lot. He's tending to personalize it and drilling it down and saying, "My disciple." You want to be my disciple? Jesus never really called himself a rabbi. That was a title that was given to him by those who saw him as teacher. And so let's just take a little word journey here and just kind of see a few things that take place. So the word disciple, mathetes, right, means learner. It means a student. It means a follower, right? So what clearly would happen was that you would meet up somewhere in the temple area lots of times if you were in Jerusalem. If not, you potentially would meet in the synagogue, and there you would have a rabbi, which simply means teacher in that sense. So you have teachers and students, and the rabbis would be scholars, scribes, so to speak, of the truth of the scriptures. Now they had rabbis that were of other things as well, but in our context here in the times of Jesus, you had a couple of camps that they were now called the House of, but they were famous rabbis, Hillel and Shammai, right? And they were two schools of thought, a little different, if you will. It would be like one was conservative, one was liberal, or however you want to term those things. And then later on, Paul mentions a man named Gamaliel, which was an honorable rabbi in the Jewish faith. And Paul was a student under him. And Paul was saying that in the midst of his credentials, like that was a big thing. And so you had very popular rabbis, and then you had disciples. Now, Jesus, so what typically would happen is you would meet up, and you would kind of journey for that day. You may even take a road trip. And so it wasn't uncommon around the land of Israel to see a man and several students that were just following with him. So what they're doing, if we understand the scriptures in the sense that we do, they were rubbing off on them. That's the whole point. A student, when he is fully taught, will be like his teacher. So these rabbis were making little mini-me's in that sense. They were transferring their knowledge to them so that they would adopt it, mimic it, and live their life. So it's really not anything different than what Jesus is doing with the disciples, right? That's exactly what he is doing. And so, but here's the thing. When you think about it and you think of these followings, I don't think there's ever been a rabbi as popular as Jesus. I don't think you could get a rabbi today to fill a stadium, but yet Jesus could have filled the Colosseums of his day and multitudes of everywhere. There were so many, they're stepping all over each other. And so it's interesting to me that you see that, but he didn't consider them all disciples. Now they would have, "Oh yeah, I'm a disciple of Jesus." He's like, "Nah, if you want to be mine, there's some cost involved," right? The others were just happy to have a crowd, wanted them to literally learn and grow and teach, but for them it was more about just the crowd. But in Jesus' following, who they would have said they were disciples, they were more like groupies, right? There were some casuals, there were some curious, there was all of that. And he was always calling them to an all-in decision. And I think it's important that we understand that. Like if you go to John 6, there's a passage where they're speaking. He had just fed the multitudes, and they followed him to the other side, and the crowd is large. And so he begins to talk to them about bread, food, right? He says, "Unless you eat my flesh and drink my blood, you have no part of me." If you want to be my disciple, it's about consuming meat. Right? Some would have taken that into cannibalistic perspective, and that is in no way what Jesus meant, and they knew that. They would just twist words. They understood the metaphor of what that means to to do that. And so many disciples quit following him at that point. This is too hard. I can't be all in like that. This is too hard. And so they left. Jesus turns around, looks at the disciples, and says, "Are you two leaving?" This is where Peter steps up, and you begin to see that he gets it. He understands the assignment in that sense, and he says, "Well, Lord, where would we go? You have the words of eternal life." Right? He understood. There's no other place but you. Earlier, Luke records that Jesus says, "If any wishes to come after me, let him deny himself, take up his cross, follow me." Not just kind of hang around me, but follow me. Not just follow where I am to hear my teaching, but follow what my teaching prescribes. Follow who I submit to, God the Father, right? This is what he's saying. And so discipleship, in Jesus' terms, meant all in. That's why when we get to Luke and he writes about the experience that the Christians had in Antioch, because he traveled with Paul, they said it was in Antioch that they first called disciples Christians, and that's where we get our term today. If you say you're a Christian, what you're saying is I am a disciple. So if you're saying you're a Christian, are you really? Have you decided? Have you decided? This is the question, and Jesus is going to lay out for us what that decision involves, and then we'll see. Because not everyone who calls himself a Christian are we going to see on the other side of this life, right? That's just fair to say. There's going to be a lot of people that think they're going to be on the other side, and Jesus says, "Depart from me, I never knew you." Why? What do they mean? They didn't begin to act like Jesus. They didn't follow Jesus. They didn't mimic Jesus. They didn't live like Jesus did. So let's just see it unfold. Now that we've kind of got that setting, his parable of the banquet was about all in. It was about commitment, right? And so now and so before I jump into this, I do want to, there's a phrase that I heard when I was probably 9, 10, 12 years old, down at the First Baptist Church in Birmingham, Alabama, when Keswick, an old kind of revival, deeper Christian living deal would happen, 5 nights of truth, and each one had a specific deal. There was a man named Stephen Olford, British guy, who would make this statement every time we went. If he is not Lord of all, then he's not Lord at all. There's no part-time Christian. There's no I'm sort of in. There's no I'm testing the waters to see if I like it. You are either all in or you're not. And so this is what it is. It is a narrow way, by the way, right? And few are they which find it. And so salvation isn't a series of steps, right? You don't just kind of step your way into it. It starts not with steps, but with an attitude that says, "Man, I am worthless. I've got nothing. I'm impoverished. I've got nothing good in me." See, this is not what's taught a lot in the American Christianity, but it's we don't start with the solution. We start with the situation, and the situation is we're all dirty, rotten, stinking little sinners. And there's no good in us. And so we need him. We are that no lack of goodness is what has made a separation between us and God. That doesn't mean we can't do good things, but there's no goodness inherently in us. And so what happens is that sin, which is our righteousness, is as filthy rags, is worthless. And so if we come to Christ and want to be his disciple, it's because we know we have to come to him naked in that sense. And this is exactly what he's going to say here in a much more noteworthy fashion than what I just told you here. The decision isn't a prayer. The decision isn't an aisle walk. The decision isn't to be a member of a church. The decision is whether you are going to be all in or you're not. That's the question. So let's look at it. He says this: "If anyone comes to me and does not hate his own father, mother, wife, children, brothers, sisters, and yes, even his own life, he cannot be one of my disciples." You can go be from somebody in the house of Hillel. You can go be somebody in the house of Shammai. But you can't be mine, right? This is it. This is next level, and no one rarely looks at this in that sense. But this is what he's saying. Jesus didn't count the cost. Are you going to choose me or your relationships? This is what he's saying, right? Now, we'll use the term, and everybody wants to kind of diminish it like, well, he's not saying actually hate. And they're right. He's not. Now, some would take that, but he's not. This is familiar terminology of choices. Jacob I loved, Esau I hated. Did he literally love Esau? I hate Esau? No, because he says in early other texts he's going to care for Esau, and Esau will be a great nation, and he's going to bless him as well, right? But in the context of where the line is going to go, who is of the elect? Who was the elect child to bring about the elect, who is Jesus? Who did that? Well, he chose Jacob, not Esau. And so this says you have to decide, are you going to choose me over your wife? Are you going to choose me over your husband? Are you going to choose me over your mother, your father, your children? Are you going to choose me over your own life? Are you going to try and get me to Jesus is saying, hey, listen, if you're trying to get me to come in and kind of join you in your journey, that's not how this thing works. I don't come and join you. You come and you join me. This is the gospel. And so this is what he says. Whoever does not carry his own cross and come after me cannot be my disciples. It comes down to that. That's what it comes down to. It's all in. That's what this means. Have you decided that it's not about you, and it's not about your friends, and it's not about your family? It's all about Jesus. Now, Jesus isn't going to take away all that stuff necessarily. He just wants to know, where are you, right? You will live a better life because you've chosen to come naked to Jesus. You will have a better relationship with your kids, whether they want it or not, because you come to Jesus. You will have a better marriage from your end, whether your spouse participates or not, because you came naked to Jesus, right? He changes everything. And this is what he's saying. If you're coming after me, it's going to be all in. And so then he says this, he gives us some illustrations. For which one of you, when he wants to build a tower, does not first sit down and calculate the cost to see if he has enough to complete it? Otherwise, when he's laid a foundation and is not able to finish, all who are watching will begin to ridicule him, saying this person began to build it, was not able to finish. Man, we see a ton of that, don't we? We see a bunch of Christians. Well, I used to be a Christian. Well, no, what you mean is you never were a Christian. You just pretended to be, or you took steps, but you weren't all in, right? You never were all in. And so this is what he's saying here. Listen, you need to contemplate. Before you want to say you're my disciple, Jesus is saying, think about it, because it's going to cost you everything. Are you willing to? So now we're turning into possessions. Nobody goes, I'm just going to build a building and I'll figure it out as I go along. You know what happens to them? Bankruptcy. Why? Because they did not count the cost. He gives us another illustration. Or what king, when he sets out to meet another king in battle, will not first sit down and consider whether he is strong enough with 10,000 men to face the one coming against him with 20,000? Otherwise, while the other is still far away, he sends a delegation and requests terms of peace. So then none of you can be my disciples who does not give up all his possessions. You're all in. You're gonna dispense with all your resources, and it's chips in, man. This is it. Right, and it's gonna be, that's what it's gonna be. Jesus over possessions. Listen, no king goes to battle without counting the cost and making sure that he can do what he's gonna do. Otherwise, there's a compromise, and there's no compromise in the Christian life. You're all in. You don't hedge your bets that Jesus is the one. You're all in. This is the text of the scriptures, right? It's where we burn the ships in that sense. We're like Peter. Well, hey, Lord, where are we going to go? You have words of eternal life. I got nowhere to go. Right? This is what it looks like. In Jesus, you have all you need. Man, I have two friends, both missionaries, both long-term friends for life. One of them is Saji Lucas, who I met when he was just beginning his ministry, and we were both young men. And he had come to Christ, and when he came to Christ in India, he had some roommates. Don't have time to tell you the story, but they kept pressing in until he understood, and he did so, and he got baptized, and he made his way home. And when he got home, his father had already heard the news, and his father beat him silly, packed a suitcase for him, put it in his hands, and said, "You're no longer my son." And as Saji walked out that door, he heard God say, "Mother and father may leave you, but I will never leave you." Now, long story short, all his family came to Christ. But He made a choice. Now, my friend Kent was on the other end of life. He was a college mate of mine, but he was older, and he was like 6 months away from getting a pension working for the government of Belize. But he knew that if he waited 6 more months to get that pension, he would miss the first semester of college, and he wanted to get his college degree so he could go back home and reach his country for Christ. And so he gave up 40 years worth of a pension because he wanted to understand and be a disciple of Christ. The result is, man, he's still breathing today. He's still kicking at ministry, and it's a flourishing thing. You come to Jesus, you give up everything, relationships and possessions. Lord bless you guys. Can't wait to share more with you in the morning.